Alright, in this next video we're going to start looking at simplifying radical expressions. Now when we say a radical, we're talking about square roots. And so we're talking about simplifying square roots, and we're actually going to learn a couple of properties of square roots. The first one being the product property. Okay? The product property of radicals. Now what this is it says that if I have a square root of two things being multiplied, then that is equal to the two things being multiplied as square roots. Okay, so if I have the square root of a times b, that's the same thing as the square root of a times the square root of b. Let me give you an example. If I have the square root of 12, okay, that is equal to the square root of 4 times 3, right? Now, I can rewrite this in this format up here so that it is the square root of 4 times the square root of 3, which now means that I can take the square root of the 4, the square root of the 4 is 2, and then leave the square root of 3. This is how we simplify radicals, and this would be our final simplified answer. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at over the next few minutes in this video and the next is we're going to be looking at various ways to simplify radicals and get them in this easier format, trying to make the numbers as small as we possibly can. Okay, and I'm actually going to show you two different ways. I've showed you one already, breaking it up into two things that multiply to give us that number that we started with. Sometimes the numbers are just too big though, and we're not able to do that. And so if that is the case, then I'll show you other ways to do it. I'll show you one other way. I'll do it with the easier numbers just so it's a little bit easier to see, but you should be able to use it with the harder numbers as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and do another example. We're going to look at the square root of 32. Okay, now one way to do this is to recognize the things that multiply together give us 32. Now I know that 32 is 8 times 4. Okay, 4 is a perfect square. And so it's okay if I want to divide it into something that's a perfect square and something else. So let's say I said it was 4. So the square root of 32 is 4 times 8. Okay, now I can take the square root of 4. The square root of 4 is 2. So that'll come outside of the square root sign, and then I'll be left with 8. Now if I had done this, then I need to make sure and look at this number, 8, and make sure that there's no perfect square factors of 8 as well. Now I realize that 8 is 4 times 2, which means that I'm going to need to do this again. So 8 is 4 times 2. Again, the square root of 4 is 2, so I can take that out, meaning I'll multiply by what's already in front here. So I'll have 4 times the square root of 2. Alright? Now, some of you are saying, well, I know that the square root of 32 is 16 times 2. Okay? And 16 is also a perfect square, and it's larger than the 4. Now, if you do pick out the largest perfect square, then when I take out the square root of that, the square root of 16 is 4, and I'll be left with the square root of 2. You'll notice that it gives me exactly the same answer. Okay? So that method is using the product property. The other way to do this is by doing a factor tree. Okay, so let's say I'm not very good with that type of thing and remembering the perfect squares. Okay, I do know that 32 is 4 times 8. 4 is 2 times 2. 8 is 2 times 4. And then 4 is 2 times 2. Right, so basically I've taken this 32 and I've broken it into pieces, and then I broke those pieces into smaller pieces until I can't break it up anymore. You'll notice that the only way I can break up the 2 is into 2 times 1, and I don't want to do that. So just because I could go on and on forever doing 1s and 2s. So at this point, I look at my numbers and I say, okay, well, I've got a pair of 2s right here. Okay, so that would be 2 squared, which means I'm going to be able to take a 2 out of my square root. I've got another pair of 2s right here, which means I'll be able to take another 2 out of the square root. And then I have a 2 that doesn't have a pair. And the number that doesn't have the pair has to stay inside the square root. Okay, because I'm trying to take numbers out of my square root here to make them smaller and simpler. And now I'm going to take this 2 times 2 and multiply it, and I get 4 root 2, which again is the same thing that I got using these other methods in other directions. Okay, so what I want to do now, that's a basic introduction. If you will go with me to the second video, then we'll work a few more problems and talk about a couple more concepts.